They say betrayal is loud, but that's not true. Real betrayal is quiet. It smiles at you across the dinner table. It holds your hand in public. It says I love you without flinching. This is a story about how one lie burned everything down. And how the fire turned on the person who lit it. Listen closely, because this one doesn't end the way you think. Lorotto used to believe in forever, not the fairy tale kind. The real kind. The kind you build slowly, through late night talks, shared groceries, and arguments about which side of the bed belongs to who. She met Daniel at a friend's birthday party. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. He wasn't the richest. But he was steady, calm, safe, and for 3 years, he made her feel chosen, until he didn't. It started small, a phone placed face down, late meetings that ran past midnight, a new password, and then the silence, you know that kind of silence. The one that creeps into a relationship before the truth does. Lorotto didn't confront him at first. She loved him. And when you love someone, you look for explanations that protect them. He's stressed. He's tired. He's just busy. But the night she found the message, everything changed. It wasn't even dramatic, just a name she didn't recognize, and one sentence: last night was worth the risk. Worth the risk? Daniel didn't deny it, he didn't even fight, he just said, it didn't mean anything. Funny how betrayal always means nothing to the person who does it. But it means everything to the person who receives it. Lorotto packed her things that same night, no screaming, no plates breaking, just dignity, and Daniel let her walk out, convinced he had options, because here's the part he didn't understand: the woman he cheated with loved the thrill, not the responsibility. She liked sneaking around, she liked feeling chosen over someone else, but once Lorotto was gone, so was the excitement. Within weeks, Daniel noticed the shift, the late replies, the cancelled plans, the "I'm just not ready for something serious" conversation, the same words he once used on Lorotto, and suddenly, he wasn't the prize anymore, he was just available. That's when regret showed up, not because he missed Lorotto's cooking, not because he missed the apartment, but because he missed being loved in a way that didn't require performance. Meanwhile, Lorotto was healing, not quickly, not perfectly, but intentionally. She cried, she questioned herself, she replayed memories, and then one day, she stopped checking her phone, stopped wondering, stopped hoping he'd explain himself better. 6 months later, Daniel saw her again, different, lighter, standing outside a bookstore, laughing at something another man whispered in her ear, the kind of laugh she used to save for him, and that's when it finally hit him: he didn't lose Lorotto the night she walked away. He lost her the moment he believed she would never leave. Betrayal is a gamble, and Daniel bet on the wrong thing. He thought loyalty was replaceable, he thought love would wait, he thought he could step outside the relationship and walk back in whenever he was done exploring. But sometimes the door doesn't stay open, sometimes the person you betray becomes the lesson you never recover from, and that's the thing about backfiring: it doesn't explode immediately, it builds slowly, until one day, you realize you traded something real for something temporary, and the temporary didn't even stay. So if you're listening to this and thinking about risking something solid for a moment of excitement, ask yourself this: is it worth the risk? Because the fire you start in someone else's heart might be the one that leaves you standing alone in the ashes, and by the time you feel the heat, it's already too late. Too late to rewind, too late to explain, too late to knock on a door that no longer belonged to him. Daniel didn't sleep much after that. Regret is strange. It doesn't scream. It whispers at 2:13 a.m. It replays memories you didn't value when they were happening. The way Lorotto used to warm his side of the bed before he got in. The way she remembered how he liked his tea without asking. The way she believed him completely. He tried texting her once: "Can we talk?" 3 simple words, she read it, no reply. That silence hurt more than any argument ever could, because silence means you're no longer fighting for something. You're finished, He told himself she was just pretending to be happy. That the man outside the bookstore was a rebound. That 3 years couldn't be erased in 6 months, but here's what he didn't understand. Loretta hadn't erased him, she had outgrown him. There's a difference. Healing had changed her posture. Her voice. The way she entered rooms without shrinking. She had done the hard work of asking herself uncomfortable questions. Why did I ignore the signs? Why did I accept less than I deserved? Why did I stay quiet when I felt something was wrong? And once you answer those questions honestly, you don't go back to what broke you. Daniel, on the other hand, was unraveling. The woman he chose over Loretta was long gone. The thrill had faded, and with it, his illusion of control. His friends grew tired of hearing the same story. I messed up. She overreacted. It wasn't serious. But deep down, he knew the truth. It was serious, because loyalty isn't measured by how big the betrayal is. It's measured by the fact that it happened at all. One evening, months later, he ran into Loretta again, this time at a mutual friend's engagement dinner. The room was warm. Soft music played in the background. Glasses clinked. She walked in wearing confidence like it had always belonged to her. They locked eyes. For a moment, everything they had flickered between them, the inside jokes. The shared dreams, the plans for a future that never came. He stepped toward her. I miss you, he said, quietly, not dramatic. Not desperate. Just honest. Loretta studied his face the way you look at an old photograph, familiar, but distant. I believe you, she replied, 3 words that could have meant hope, but her tone didn't carry it. You were my home, he added. She nodded slowly, and you were my lesson. Not cruel. Not angry. Just true. There are people who come into your life to build with you, and there are people who come into your life to show you what you will never tolerate again. Daniel opened his mouth to say more, but there was nothing left to negotiate. No loophole. No second chance wrapped in nostalgia. She had already forgiven him, and that was the part that hurt the most, because forgiveness doesn't always come with reunion, but sometimes it comes with release. Later that night, as Loretta left the dinner with the man who now held her hand openly, no secrets, no shadows, Daniel finally understood what backfiring really feels like. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's watching someone you had become happier without you. It's realizing you weren't competing with another person, you were competing with peace, and peace won, so the fire he once lit didn't burn her down. It refined her, and in the end, the only thing left in the ashes was him. Daniel went home that night to an apartment that echoed, not because it was empty, but because it no longer had meaning. The couch was still there. The framed artwork still hung slightly crooked on the wall. The kitchen light still flickered if you didn't switch it on twice. But the warmth that once filled the space was gone. He sat down and stared at his phone again. This time, he didn't text her, he opened old photos instead, smiles that were real. Trips that felt effortless. A version of himself that looked secure, not restless, and for the first time, he stopped blaming the moment. He started examining himself, because betrayal doesn't begin the night you cheat, it begins the day you start entertaining what you know you shouldn't. It begins in the ego, in the need to feel admired, in the quiet arrogance that says, I can fix this later. Daniel had loved Loretta, that part was true, but he loved validation more, and validation is greedy. It always wants more than you can afford to give. Weeks turned into months. He tried dating again, but something felt different. The conversations were shallow. The connection never rooted. Every woman he met felt temporary, and not because they weren't enough, but because he now understood what real loyalty had looked like, and he had traded it. Meanwhile, Loretta wasn't moving fast, she wasn't rushing into forever, she was choosing carefully. The man in her life now, Sifo, didn't promise fireworks. He promised consistency. He didn't hide his phone, he didn't disappear for hours, he didn't make her question her intuition, and the most powerful part, she no longer ignored red flags. The first time Sifo did something small that bothered her, she spoke up calmly. No fear of being too much. No anxiety about being abandoned. Healing had given her a voice. One afternoon, nearly a year after the breakup, Daniel sent one final message. Not to ask for her back, not to reopen doors, just accountability. I was selfish. You didn't deserve that. I hope you're happy. It took him that long to say it without secretly hoping for something in return. Loretta read it, and this time, she responded, "Thank you. I am." That was it, no bitterness. No hidden emotion, just closure. And that's when the lesson completed itself. Betrayal backfires in ways people don't talk about. It doesn't always ruin the person who was betrayed. Sometimes it builds them, it sharpens their standards, it strengthens their boundaries, it teaches them the cost of ignoring their own instincts. But the one who betrays, they left with memory, with comparison, with the quiet understanding that they once had something rare and handled it carelessly. Daniel eventually moved on, not because he forgot, but because life keeps moving whether you're ready or not, and somewhere inside him, there will always be the awareness that he once stood at a crossroads between ego and loyalty, and chose wrong. As for Loretta, she no longer fears betrayal the way she once did. Because she learned something powerful: love is not proven by how long someone stays, it's proven by how they behave when temptation knocks. And when you survive someone choosing against you, you stop begging to be chosen, you start choosing yourself. And that is the kind of ending that doesn't just close a chapter, it rewrites the whole story. Rewriting your story doesn't happen in one bold decision, it happens in quiet ones, in the mornings when you wake up and don't check who hasn't called, in the evenings when you sit with your thoughts instead of running back to what hurt you, in the moments you choose peace over pride. Loretta didn't suddenly become fearless, she still had days when doubt knocked, days when a delayed reply from Cypher made her chest tighten for a second. Days when a memory would slip in uninvited, a song, a scent, a street corner that once held a different version of her life. But here's the difference: she no longer let fear drive, she asked questions instead of assuming, she communicated instead of shrinking. She walked away from discomfort early instead of waiting for disaster. Growth doesn't erase pain. It teaches you how to handle it differently. Cypher noticed it too, the strength beneath her softness. The way she didn't tolerate half-truths. The way she listened carefully, not just to him, but to herself. One evening, while they sat on his balcony watching the city lights blink on one by one, he asked her gently, "What changed you?" She didn't hesitate. "I stopped trying to be enough for someone who wasn't afraid to lose me." It wasn't bitterness in her voice, it was clarity, and clarity is dangerous to anyone who thrives on confusion. Back across town, Daniel heard through mutual friends that Loretta was thriving. New job opportunity. Traveling more. Laughing freely. At first, it stung, then it humbled him, because he finally understood something he couldn't see before. Loretta didn't glow because of him, she glowed despite him. The version of her he once thought he lost wasn't the best version, it was the beginning version, and sometimes betrayal is the pressure that turns potential into power. Years later, when people ask Loretta about love, she doesn't tell them fairy tales, she tells them this: love isn't about intensity, it's about integrity, it's about choosing the person you said you would choose, even when no one is watching, it's about knowing that trust, once cracked, never fits the same again. And if someone ever tries to convince her that betrayal just happens, she simply smiles, because she knows better. It happens in steps, in choices, in moments when character is tested quietly. And character always reveals itself. In the end, the story wasn't about Daniel losing Loretta, it was about Loretta finding herself. And the truth about betrayal, it always circles back, not with revenge, not with drama, but with reflection. One person walks away wounded but wiser, the other walks away unchanged, until life teaches them the lesson the hard way. And when the dust settles, the backfire isn't explosive. It's subtle, it's realizing that the love you mishandled has grown into something you no longer qualify for, and that realization, it lingers far longer than regret. Regret has a way of aging differently than love. Love softens with time, regret sharpens. Daniel felt it in ordinary moments. At weddings, when vows were exchanged and everyone clapped. At family gatherings, when someone asked casually, "So, are you seeing anyone serious?" At night, when the room went quiet and there was no one to reach for, he dated. Of course he did, but now he paid attention in ways he never had before. He noticed how easy it was to impress someone new. How simple it was to create chemistry. How quickly people mistook excitement for depth, and every time he felt that rush, he recognized it, temporary. He used to chase that feeling, now he understood the cost. Meanwhile, Larotte's life didn't revolve around proving anything. She wasn't performing happiness. She wasn't posting for validation. She was building something steady, within herself first, and then with someone who met her at that level. The trust between her and Cypher wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It didn't come with grand gestures, it came with consistency, with small promises kept, with honesty delivered even when it was uncomfortable, and that kind of love doesn't feel like fireworks, it feels like safety. One afternoon, years after everything had fallen apart, Larotte ran into Daniel again. Not at a party. Not at a dinner. Just in a grocery store aisle, of all places. No music playing. No cinematic lighting. Just fluorescent bulbs and a cart between them. They greeted each other politely. There was no tension anymore, no unfinished business. He asked how she'd been. She told him she was good. He meant it when he said he was glad, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he was standing in ashes, he felt like he was standing in front of a mirror. Because seeing her calm, grounded, whole, it forced him to confront the version of himself that once wasn't. "I learned a lot," he admitted quietly. She gave him a small nod. "So did I, and that was enough." Not every betrayal ends in dramatic revenge, sometimes it ends in growth on both sides, just at different speeds. Larotte's growth protected her, Daniel's growth humbled him, and maybe that's the real backfire no one talks about. When you betray someone who truly loved you, you don't just lose them, you lose the version of yourself that could have kept them. You lose the chance to build something solid without having to question your own character. You lose the simplicity of being trusted. But if you're willing to face it, really face it, you gain something too: accountability, depth, awareness. Daniel eventually built a healthier relationship. Not because he forgot what he did, but because he refused to repeat it. The memory of losing Larotte became a boundary inside him, a line he would never cross again, and Larotte, she no longer saw her past as a wound, she saw it as proof that she could survive disappointment, proof that walking away doesn't weaken you, proof that when someone risks losing you and does, it says more about their readiness than your worth. So if you're listening to this and wondering whether betrayal always destroys everything, it doesn't. Sometimes it destroys illusions, sometimes it burns away what was unstable, sometimes it clears the ground for something stronger to grow, and in the quiet years that follow, when everyone has moved on and life looks ordinary again, the truth settles in: character is destiny, what you choose in secret eventually shapes what you're allowed to keep, and love, real love, doesn't compete. It simply waits to see who is mature enough to protect it. And that protection isn't dramatic, it doesn't show up as grand speeches or constant reassurance, it shows up in the everyday discipline of choosing the same person over and over again. Years passed, life unfolded the way it always does, slowly, then all at once, Larotte built a life that felt intentional. Her career grew. Her circle got smaller but stronger. The love she shared with Cypher deepened, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. They disagreed sometimes. They misunderstood each other. They had hard conversations, but neither of them weaponized silence, neither of them entertained escape routes. They stayed, and staying, when done right, is powerful. Daniel's journey looked different. It took him longer to understand that loyalty isn't about opportunity, it's about character. He had to sit with the discomfort of knowing he once had something good and handled it carelessly, but growth isn't reserved for the person who was hurt, it's available to the one who caused the hurt too, if they're brave enough to confront themselves. One evening, sitting alone after a long day, Daniel thought about how easily he once confused attention for love. How he mistook admiration for connection. How he chased validation because it filled a gap he never addressed. Betrayal didn't start with Lorotto, it started long before her, in insecurity. In ego, in the quiet need to feel wanted by everyone instead of valued by one, understanding that changed him, not overnight, but steadily, and that's the part no one claps for. The internal work that doesn't make headlines. The real backfire wasn't public embarrassment, it wasn't losing face in front of friends, it wasn't even losing Lorotto, it was being forced to face himself, because when the dust settles, when the excitement fades, when the options disappear, you're left with your character, and character doesn't lie. Years later, if you asked Lorotto about Daniel, she wouldn't speak with anger. She wouldn't even speak with sadness, she would speak with neutrality, and neutrality is the true sign that something no longer owns you. If you asked Daniel about Lorotto, he would say she was one of the most important chapters of his life, not because they ended up together, but because losing her taught him what he should have known all along. Love isn't hard to find, but integrity is rare, and when you mix the two, you protect it. So here's the quiet truth about betrayal that people don't always admit. It doesn't just test the relationship, it tests the individual, it reveals who is willing to grow and who is willing to gamble. In this story, one person chose temptation, the other chose dignity, and in the long run, dignity builds a life that temptation never could, because at the end of the day, when you turn off the lights and lay down with your thoughts, there's only one question that matters: did you protect what trusted you? If the answer is yes, you rest peacefully. If the answer is no, you learn, sometimes the hard way. Either way, the lesson arrives. And once it does, you're never quite the same again. Being changed by a lesson doesn't always feel dramatic, sometimes it's subtle. It's in the way you pause before responding, in the way you think twice before entertaining something that once felt harmless, in the way your standards become quieter but firmer. Lorotto eventually understood something deeper than heartbreak. She understood alignment, not just chemistry, not just attraction, not just history. Alignment, shared values, shared discipline, shared understanding of what commitment actually costs, because commitment costs something. It costs ego, it costs impulse, it costs the thrill of what if. And not everyone is ready to pay that price. There were moments, rare but real, when she reflected on her past and wondered how different life might have looked if Daniel had chosen differently, but the thought never lingered long, because she realized something freeing: if someone has to become someone else to love you properly, then they weren't meant to love you in that season. Timing matters, readiness matters, character matters more than potential. Daniel, in his own way, came to understand that too. He stopped romanticizing the version of himself who thought he could balance loyalty and temptation without consequences. He stopped blaming circumstances. He stopped telling the story in a way that made him look misunderstood. He owned it fully, and ownership does something interesting: it removes shame and replaces it with responsibility. One day, years later, he found himself giving advice to a younger colleague who was on the verge of sabotaging his own relationship for something exciting. Daniel didn't preach, he simply said, "Be careful what you risk for a moment. You might lose something that would have lasted." It wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. Daniel stumbled, then learned to stand later, and maybe that's the quiet redemption in all of this. Not everyone who betrays stays broken, not everyone who is betrayed stays wounded, but the difference lies in who is willing to confront the truth without excuses. So if there's one thing this story leaves behind, it's this: love will test you, temptation will tempt you, ego will whisper, but integrity is the voice that determines what you're allowed to keep. And once you understand that, you move differently, you love differently, you choose differently, because you know now what you protect today. becomes the peace you live with tomorrow. And peace, once earned, becomes addictive, not the loud kind, not the kind you post about, the quiet kind, the kind that lets you fall asleep without replaying conversations. The kind that doesn't make you check someone's tone for hidden meaning. The kind that doesn't force you to compete for the bare minimum. Laroto grew into that peace slowly. She learned that love doesn't need constant reassurance when trust is intact. She learned that real connection feels steady, not chaotic. And most importantly, she learned that her intuition was never the enemy, her silence was. There was a time she ignored her inner voice because she didn't want to seem insecure. Because she didn't want to ruin things. Because she thought love meant enduring. Now she knew better. Love meant participating. It meant two people choosing each other fully, not one person convincing the other to stay. Sappho noticed that about her. The way she showed up whole. The way she didn't cling. The way she gave love freely but never desperately. And when he proposed, it wasn't about replacing the past, it was about building forward. No shadows, no comparisons, just intention. On the other side of the city, Daniel's life had steadied too. Not perfect. Not glamorous. But grounded. He no longer chased attention. He no longer mistook desire for depth. He took his time. He asked better questions. He walked away from situations that felt too familiar in the wrong way. Because once you truly understand the cost of betrayal, the thrill loses its shine. Years earlier, he thought backfiring meant immediate loss. Now he understood it was bigger than that. The real consequence was the long lesson. Time has a quiet way of closing stories without asking for permission. One day, what once felt unbearable becomes distant. The memories don't sting the same. The questions don't circle like they used to. Life fills in the empty spaces with new routines, new laughter, new responsibilities. Laroto eventually stopped telling the story of how she was betrayed, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defined her. When people met her, they didn't see heartbreak. They saw confidence. They saw clarity. They saw a woman who knew exactly what she would and would not tolerate, and that confidence didn't come from never being hurt, it came from surviving it without losing herself. Daniel's life found its rhythm too. He built something steady, something healthier than the chaos he once entertained. He became more intentional. Slower to speak. Quicker to reflect. If you looked at him now, you wouldn't see the man who once risked something real for something temporary. You'd see someone who learned the hard way that character isn't proven when things are easy, it's proven when you have options. And maybe that's how this story was always meant to unfold, not as a tale of revenge, not as a dramatic reunion, but as a reminder. Betrayal doesn't just test love. It tests identity. It asks, who are you when no one is watching? What do you value when temptation feels justified? What are you willing to lose to protect your ego? In the end, Laroto chose herself, Daniel chose growth, and life moved forward. There's no dramatic final scene. No poetic justice delivered with thunder and rain, just two people, years later, living with the consequences of their choices, one shaped by dignity, the other reshaped by regret and reflection. And that's the quiet truth about love and betrayal. The person who walks away with self-respect always rebuilds stronger. The person who betrays either repeats the pattern or breaks it, but either way, the lesson stays. Because love is never just about who stays, it's about who protects what they're given, and when the right person finally arrives, the one who values integrity over impulse, you don't have to beg to be chosen, you simply stand in your worth. And the right one stands with you. That's the real ending, not a reunion, not revenge, but peace. And peace, once earned, is the kind of love that never backfires.